Hello, it's January 14th, 2017. I'm Tony Samario here at BroSal.org YouTube channel, and this is going to be End Times Trending again, because I think at the moment it's more important commentary to follow some of these propaganda machines, this momentum that's working right now to draw us into the place we're in. And so one of the things I want to talk about, I mean, the World War III this week is something that I want to sum up in another show and point out that we're not there yet. This is the setup, and that war is probably in the future some years. But at the moment, I want to focus on some of these different trending subjects that are being used to set up the war, so that we can get at who's behind it and why. What's the real purpose? This whole Rothschilds banking, the CFR, the Bilderbergs, the pyramid, the Illuminati. None of that explains a purpose. These are all symbols, like saying China is hacking us, Russia is hacking us, as if all the Russian people are in on this. This is a whole cultural thing. No, it's not. It's probably not even happening in the way that we're being told. So I want to start looking at these subjects a little bit one at a time, and I see that the views are way down because it's getting harder and harder to find real information now on the internet because of all this fake news idea. And so I'm going to cover that also. I want to do perhaps a series of slightly shorter analysis of these different things, like fake news, and like Russian hacking, and all these other subjects right now that I believe are misleading everyone into this hysteria of the moment. And I think it can only be looked at rationally that this hysteria of the moment is being manipulated on purpose. They're putting us in this position to react on these different issues. None of these issues are new. Not a single one of the things, from global warming to Russian propaganda to transgender issues, church versus state. These are all old issues that have been, they're well calloused. When I grew up in the booming 80s and 90s, these were issues that you were laughed at if you made too big a deal out of it, because these were things we'd covered already. But like movies, the way they just drag up the old screenplays and they make the new version for the new generation that hasn't seen that propaganda told that way yet, that story related in that popular fashion, they remake it so that the next generation can become attached to their media heroes, giving them the same old story. And that's certainly going on in our geopolitical world. In fact, there's been a few cool things I've seen. People have put together videos of different presidents over the entire course of our history, saying the same lines in their campaign speeches. I mean, literally, not just lines, sentences, paragraphs, whole thoughts, relating exactly the same thing the same way, because that's how they worked out was the best way to say it. And so nobody's changed it. They just take their turn at it. And you have to see that that's, in a mafia system, it pretty much is predictable. The power, the way it flows, the loyalty, the way it's kept, the way it's monitored and enforced. That's how the world runs. But why? What driving impetus is behind the world running the way it does. It's pretty easy to see that the money that has funded it the last 100 years and where those people come from, not just Rockefeller, not just Rothschilds, but the Rockefellers get involved, and the Schiffs, and the whole banking industry, the whole transportation industry, the whole oil and energy sectors, all communication, all these things have been, if you can imagine, the same money as the stuff that went out and conquered all these industries. That's why it wasn't a big deal for them to move them to China, because people lost their jobs and the economy tanked, but that just meant they could buy up all your real estate cheap, just like the last time it tanked in '08. And what have they been doing? Foreclosing like a son of a gun and buying up all the real estate cheap. And so, and this guy we got coming into the government, this, he comes from these people, the biggest company foreclosing on people after, real like aggressive foreclosures. Get out, that's our property. Really harmful stuff. This is one of Trump's picks now, coming into our government. So, all the signs are all billionaires coming in. If you really think the billionaires are there to help the American people or anybody, so again, where's it all leading? What's it all, what do these people want? What have they been doing for 100 years that includes all these, puppets down the line? CFR is just a collection of puppets. These people don't make decisions. They get handed itineraries. Here's where we're trying to go. We need the silver of Mexico. We need the resources of Mexico. We need their workers, and we want their industries. Okay, NAFTA. Think tanks, come up with something. Well, NAFTA, we could sell that to the American people as being good for trade, and really it's good for what we're trying to do. Exploit the resources and control more of the planet. So those things are easy to see, how they manipulate the markets, how they manipulate healthcare, why America is like one of the worst in actual health care, but it costs the most and the few people at the top make the most. So, that's pretty easy to see that it doesn't take geniuses to figure out that that's on purpose. They could fix that, but don't. They could bring jobs back to America, but don't. They could have a world without all the war and conflict, but don't. They could have a political system full of fairly honest people that were held in check through a reasonably legitimate journalistic, system, but we don't, because they don't want that. They don't want real journalism digging up dirt on these people and telling us what's really going on, because they could pay for that. They could have that. So you got to look at the world as being sort of on purpose and ask yourself why. And I say most of the answers we're given, even through the alternative media, are not satisfactory, because they don't answer for why the world is the way it is. Only the I hate to use the word religious answers, because false religion is what rules the religious world. But the true religious vision, even if it's a more allegorical occult vision, it's still a vision of man falling from some divine oneness or unity into a state of ego selfishness that brings him through that zeitgeist relationship to reality, the image of his own soul. We are a violent, aggressive, selfish, greedy, wanton race of people, and that's what comes out in our politics, in the expression of our society. I say that's only half the argument, because it leaves out any kind of spiritual element. If you just imagine we're some sort of evolved ape, then you can imagine that we are simply the expression of our own consciousness. This is what's evolved. And from a spiritual occult level, they'll say that we fell from some divine oneness that we started at, and our job, our responsibility is to climb the tree of life and reunite, let go of this wanton life of selfish, greedy superstition in many cases, but misguided values, and reunite with our divine nature. Religion just provides a more personal relationship to all that, and so everybody can work out for themselves what the religious factor means to them. Is there a personal God that is more like a person than like a divine nature, like a unifying force or something like that? But my point is simply that the fall of mankind is universally understood by almost everybody. Nobody thinks we're what we're supposed to be. And so explaining how we got here and why is a whole metaphysical, philosophical endeavor that we try and take on, and I have some explanations. But with what's trending in the world, I say most commentary does not approach giving it a perspective that makes any sense. We simply are happy to point out that something isn't what it claims to be, and we can see some of the shadow influences behind it. But we imagine that these shadows are just acting graphically dark simply for the sake of being dark, right? They just want for the sake of wanting. They just kill for the sake of killing. They want to control everybody. But that's nothing new. So all of our heroes that we point to, the Columbuses, and I don't care which king and queen you love, most of them can fall into that category. They want to control the people. The Machiavellian relationship, the Caesar, divide and conquer, bread and circus for the Romans to keep them busy so they don't realize they're being ruled and enslaved against what their own freedom to be self-determining. All these kind of things have been going on an awful long time. So what I say, the real insight is what's going on the last 100 years that we can extract from history that's close to us to see where this narrative is going. And I say that the easiest or the most obvious string is the one over Palestine, the Holy Land, this war in the Middle East 100 years ago that coincides with them finding oil over there. So it fits the pattern of the industrialists and the money people taking control of a resource. They needed that land anyway because that's where the future and the oil was going to be. So okay, concoct a story about we need to get back to the Holy Land. I can buy that. No religion in it. These people aren't religious. My point is simply that the story is still we're getting back to the Holy Land. How are they going to sell that? Well, there's these religious prophecies about God bringing the Jews back someday to this land he kicked them out of, and reestablishing Jerusalem as the center of the world and ruling there through their Messiah that will come forever on the earth. No rivals ever again. That's the way their prophecy goes. So, how about we seize on that prophecy? We're all Jews, right? We're all Jews. God's bringing us back to that land. How do we know it's not us he's choosing to do it through? Did he send Joshua into the land without, as a preacher or as a warrior? You know what I mean? After Moses dies and the tribes go conquer that promised land, at least, the way it's recorded in the legend that we call the Old Testament, it was quite bitter battle and slaughter. A lot of death, a lot of killing of innocent people that had nothing to do with anything except raising their goats. So, it's not hard to see why they expect their Messiah to come like their legend declares, like King David, slaughter all their enemies. Solomon builds the temple, and that's the high point of this historical narrative of this Jewish race, right? So it's prophesied that will repeat someday. And these Khazarian Jews, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't really matter where they came from. Anybody can convert to Judaism. Let's say they're Jews and they believe it. It still doesn't make that their land, and it doesn't make God bringing them back there because they can go fight for it. But it shows you why there can be a legitimate argument in somebody's mind, if you're going to follow the religious framework. These people say they're Jews, God's going to bring them back, they're going to rebuild a temple, their Messiah is going to come, and they're going to rule forever. Why not us? Why don't we go back there and get that land and let God send his Messiah? So it's easy to sell that to the religious people, I imagine, if you're waiting for God to bring you back there as one of these Jews living in the world of the diaspora, scattered throughout the world and now being persecuted. But when you look at where the persecution come, strangely enough, or coincidentally, or suspiciously, it came from the same money. It's the whole order out of chaos, right? You create the chaos because that way you know what order is required. So you stimulate what came to be known as anti-Semitism, and it's pretty well documented that that's what happened. Broke out in Poland and Russia right at the end of the 19th century, right before the Dreyfus affair, also that became well known to be funded by these same Jews to create this anti-Semitic sentiment. That's when they coined this idea of Zionism, freedom from the world's persecution of God's people, right? So, if you don't understand the depth of the historical narrative, you can't get into why it's so important right now, and why, no matter what you're being told in this propagandized world, the real truth is that these people are following a narrative in which rebuilding their temple and waiting for the Messiah to come and rule forever is what puts them in the position to fulfill that and be able to blame it on God if they're not religious, which I think people running the show are purely twisted in their heart. They certainly don't have the Spirit of God in them if there's a spiritual world. If not, then they're simply the greediest and most powerful of people, most ruthless, the Nietzscheite, right? The perfect overman of Nietzsche's philosophy is what appears to rule the world. And so you can see how in the beginning, okay, how do you get the land back? Well, you need anti-Semitism to, order out of chaos. That drives the need. Problem, reaction, solution. Oh, people are persecuting the Jews. They haven't for 1,000 years, really. But now they're persecuting them. Boom, we need a land for the Jews so they don't get, they have no strength. They're around the world and they're being persecuted in other people's cultures. So the intention is drawn up, known as the Balfour Declaration, right? How do we get them? How do we get the Jews now to want to go repopulate this land? Well, World War II provided that. We persecute them mercilessly so that we can create the world outcry, give the Jews back their land. Now they got a state. We create this state. And, of course, all done through the history shows the oppression, through the weaponry, through the pushing those Muslims off that land. Then, okay, Jerusalem still isn't theirs. This new state of Israel, they don't have Jerusalem, but they want Jerusalem. So what do they have? 6-day war. And they take the Golan Heights, they take Jerusalem, they take the Gaza Strip, they take the West Bank, they take the Sinai, and now they have bargaining chips and or a reason to continue a conflict with all their neighbors for as long as it takes to stimulate us toward this Third World War. If you're going to buy that somebody predicted or strategized that it would take 3 wars to accomplish their plan, and I say the plan when you look at the last 100 years of what they've been spending the money on, Israel. Look at all the weapons in Israel. The buildup, the fighting, this peace process, the whole thing's, since 48 at least, in the establishment of the state, the wars over there, are meddling in Iran, are meddling in all the affairs of the Middle East. The deal with OPEC and the oil, the petrodollar system. I mean, it's just decade after decade, that's been the center of the world since the state of Israel was founded. So I say that's where you should be watching, for your answer to what's going on. And the simple answer is that, they want to build a temple over there because that's the next stage. But, of course, that's not their land. They took it by force. They've been terrorizing their neighbors. Their neighbors lived for 1,000 years in peace and harmony. Christians, Jews, Muslims, all living in these communities. Nobody killing each other. Everybody goes to their own mosque, their own church, their own temple. And now all of a sudden, just like all of a sudden with all these issues, you've got this stimulated, manipulated violence and hostility on every front, okay? So I want to just briefly point out all these things now surrounding this Israel and Jerusalem that I see being big factors trending right now. The move, of course, of the embassy, which even Jordan and Egypt have chimed in to say will bring violence. Everybody, it's just a completely contentious issue. And of course, Donald Trump, he knows better than everybody. Just like with the Russian hacking, our whole, system of supposed intelligence gathering and, defense system says Russia absolutely is hacking and interfering. Even Europe's on guard and accusing them. But Donald Trump knows better. And just like now in Jerusalem, every president's vetoed the idea of moving because they know that'll bring violence. That's not fair. That's still a disputed territory. These guys are building new construction on disputed territory. The UN has slapped the state of Israel with more condemnations than any other, country in the world. And yet, it's the world that's always wrong. And the U.S. and Israel, of course, that are always the righteous people. That's how, and the Zionist Christians back all that. So if you don't see a manipulated propaganda in that, I'm going to do a trending here on the propaganda machine that is our world. But anyway, today's is on Israel and Jerusalem, and I want you to notice that what they're giving us is the promise of violence and war over the idea of moving the embassy, which I say is all just set up. It's all set up. The end is not yet. The UN resolutions all set up. They got this Paris summit coming where all of a sudden with this war in Syria that's been going on for years, threatening, half of the country of Syria's refugees. And that refugee crisis that was threatening a year ago to change Europe. Europe was going to be changed forever. And I don't know what happened with all that, but now all of a sudden it's Palestine and Israel. It's back on the Palestinian-Israeli thing, right? Got to settle that. I don't know what bottle rockets they've been shooting off, how many rocks the Palestinians have been throwing. I don't know how much worse the violence is than it's been in the, I remember when there was suicide bombs going off every day, every other day over there. I haven't heard of any of that really compared to what it used to be. But all of a sudden the focus is on this Palestine-Israel peace process in the middle of the Syria war where America said Assad had to go. Turkey, there's no dealing with Assad. A year ago, if you remember, guys, Assad had to go. We're America, the great America who vetoes. We have to be right about Israel against the UN, but we don't have to be right about Assad had to go. Now Russia steps in, and all of a sudden Assad's talking about who he's going to talk to from the other side. Because he's not going to deal with terrorists. So he wants to just deal with a legitimate Syrian opposition. Who are the real Syrians? Who's speaking for the Syrians and not for the CIA or blah, blah, blah. That's Assad's position. Why is he able to talk like that a year after being in a 3-year war with America when we said he had to go? Start to look at the rhetoric for what it is, because they know you don't remember that. You don't care what they said a year ago. Because they've got you programmed only to care about what they say on tonight's news. So it doesn't matter that all these talking heads have been wrong about everything they've told you for their entire career, year in and year out. They're wrong, 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 wrong every single time about everything. And yet, that's where we keep reacting to what they're telling us is going on. And so I'm going to cover that in all this fake news. I hope you guys will pay attention. I feel like we're the most invisible channel that's giving, some of the most insightful commentary on the internet. And I only say that because I've been out here researching for a long time, and I have a hard time finding any channels nowadays that aren't just hot air. Hot air. It's all BS. I'm really, we're coming to something here. We'll cover that in the fake news show. Okay, so the Temple Institute, of course, they've got ads going on all over Israel and things for years, but they're just picking it up. They're walking through the ceremonies, slaughtering the heifers. They got everything built. They've got stuff on display. So they've got this constant promotion that they're close to rebuilding the temple. There was an article, I don't know what kind of propaganda, BS or what, but it tells you where the pulse of their thinking is. The Israeli police are preparing security for the return of Messiah because, their rabbis tell them it's imminent, and because they're a state based on the fact that God brought them back and they're waiting for their Messiah to come. Let's not forget what the state of Israel believes about themselves in their propagandized narrative. Just like America's the great and free country bringing freedom to the world, Israel's the country that God brought back to their land. That's why the Zionist Christians support them. So the Israeli police are preparing security for the return of Messiah, which they feel is imminent. The truck terror that just, supposedly hit Israel, which, we're going to cover this in the fake news idea, these hoaxes. I mean, they don't seem to care at all that anyone with any research journalism instincts at all can see maybe not even that. Anybody with any rational sense can point out the hoaxes. And this latest one with the Israeli truck attack, they've made it obvious again. The truck is just put in there as a CGI. It's so obvious. And yet, they continue to talk about it in the news every day as verifiable terror. ISIS claiming more of this terror that, of course, doesn't have any strategy. All these killings of lone gunman killings, they never even leave a manifesto. They never even point out that this killing is in retaliation for this or that. We want this or that. Nothing. Just killing just to show you how awful we are, how much we hate you, just so the world has to attack you. If you listen to what I said a year and a half ago when this ISIS scam started, and I called it for what it was, just like I called the Arab Spring for what it was, I said that eventually it would have to threaten Israel. Until you've got Israel brought into the center of it, and now you do, because Syria is accusing Israel of bombing some stuff over there near Damascus that is above and beyond their normal fight against Hezbollah. They're always, talking about they're bombing Hezbollah targets, but all of a sudden now you've got that inflamed where Syria is saying, hey, Israel's bombing us over here against our agreements, or the crossing that line, even if it's an undeclared line. So anyway, and I found it interesting in that truck terror, someone saying that this new wave of truck terror, that someone's realized it's the most effective way to cause mass casualties. And I thought, really? That's the most effective way to get your ISIS operative to somehow go find a big truck that he can get his hands on and go drive it through an area and drive over people. That's the most effective way to cause mass. Not strap a backpack on yourself, walk into a stadium full of people, or walk into a shopping mall full of people, walk into a grocery store full of people, go to a tourist trap full of people with backpacks where they're not checking everybody, and blow yourself up in a parking lot, or just park your car in the parking lot full of tourists at Disneyland. I mean, there's a million ways to inflict horrible terror. See, the point is they don't want that yet. They want this supposed terror that, I mean, come on, really? Go get a big truck and run over people? Yeah, that's really the most effective way, I think, to show that you've got them on the run. I mean, it's really the least, it shows that they don't really want us that scared yet, or they'd blow up supermarkets and, things that you can't protect. You're not going to have suddenly people screening every person walking in a supermarket, are you? So it's going to scare the hell out of everybody, and you're going to stop going to the supermarket. So it would be that easy to terrorize the world if I was a strategist trying to terrorize the Western world. Real terror such as shopping malls and supermarkets, that would keep people home, wouldn't it? State parks and such. But you never hear of any of that. Nothing. Just these crazy lone gunman attacks. And these 3 terror truck attacks have all been shown quite clearly to be staged. I'm sorry, nobody died in those, you guys. If you think they did, boy, oh boy, the mainstream, I mean, that you just have to realize that's how far we are apart from a critical look at reality and a hypnotized, brainwashed version of reality. So I say right now what's coming with this Paris summit is going to be the next big key to the setup for Israel and Jerusalem. I think this whole threat of the embassy move and all the talk about it, that's all to stir the pot. All the saber rattling right now is to stir the pot because they're moving in that direction. But it's, the end is not yet. We've got to see a covenant. We've got to see the end of ISIS, I think, first, before we're going to see the covenant about what to do with it. And that's all coming, I think. They're telling us we're getting close to the end of ISIS, just not the end of lone nut terrorism, because that's our new Cold War. All right, we'll cover more of that in some more episodes. I hope to do some rapid stuff here. I haven't forgot about the book of Job. In fact, I'm really interested in where we're going with that in the Bible study. The more I reflect on it, the more I appreciate the fact that this old poem is there to shed some light on what is, an ever-present journey with the Spirit of God, as most recently, as far as I'm concerned, represented on earth in the man of who we call Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua. He was, I think, the man imbued in that Spirit of God to be the sacrifice, just as the whole narrative points to. That's what gives it some personality rather than just a fictional poem, a surreal myth like the Greek gods that represent real life, but not in an actual personal way. I can't really believe in these nymphs and in these fates and in these mischievous gods that change their mind. That's a little unbelievable, even though it does represent the way life feels to me. But a Jesus of Nazareth actually walking the earth, walking on water, changing water to wine, healing people, that crosses a boundary now. That now is a supernatural reality embodied in something that's me, that looks just like me. And so I encourage everyone to just study the Bible study with us, because we're, truth, not tradition. We're seeking to find the reality and the teaching and the history behind Christianity, not this BS hypocrisy and judgment that really is the opposite what anything that could be called Christianity. And so I'm going to cover that in false religion. Anyway, I hope people will keep listening here. I appreciate those that are. I'm not really discouraged at the amount of views we get. I'm actually encouraged that we're so on the money that no one can hear our truth. And so I'm really very grateful for the few that do. And we're going to try and expand, I think, to Instagram here pretty soon. See if anybody out there on Instagram will follow us. Anyway, thanks for being here, guys. Talk to you again soon. See you again soon.